Okay, that's a long introduction out the way. Mentioned before in the headline article for today with the Telegraph, ministers lose track of 150,000 migrants. The government has admitted, this was published yesterday, it has no idea how many foreign workers remain in the UK. And we've seen that because they don't like to track the data on these things. The Welsh government is the same. You try looking into whatever stats it might be, crime by ethnicity or crime by demographic, whatever it might be, entry numbers. The government seem to want to lie at every turn. But this is another case now where it's not just malice, it seems to be incompetence as well, where they can't even keep track of their own incompetence and their own malice. So apparently they have lost track of more than 150,000 migrants who have come to the UK on social care visas. So I might have said in the intro that they were the small boats. They've come here on social care visas, so it might not have been all small boat migrants and all the rest of it. But it says here, in another article from June, immigration is the biggest burden on the NHS, say Labour voters. Where is it? Because this was an article that was linked in the other article that I'm going to read more from now. Maxwell Marlowe, the Director of Public Affairs at the Adam Smith Institute, which commissioned the poll that they're referring to, by the way, is a poll of 2,000 Labour supporters by Merlin Strategy, which found that 1 in 5 Labour voters would now consider casting their ballots for Reform UK. Research carried out in May on May 24th for people who voted Labour in 2024. 5 factors they believed which was the biggest burden on the NHS. 24% said high levels of immigration, whilst 22% said the mental health crisis. And the response from Maxwell Marlowe said, "It is clear that British people felt the impact of mass migration on healthcare. Unless the government moves quickly, urging immigrants to purchase private healthcare as a requirement for any visa other than tourism, then they will continue to hold the government accountable for the very rapid deterioration of their access to healthcare." Got some interesting interviews hopefully coming up that are really going to highlight things which I've spoken to people in the past. I've spoken to Victoria Rickson, I've spoken to Justine Winter, I've spoken to Lisa Peregrine. Got 2 interviews coming up hopefully in the near future. People that have really suffered at the hands of the healthcare system in this country through negligence, through all manner of other things, through incompetence, in many instances through malice. So stay tuned for those coming up in the near future. The government has admitted it has no idea how many foreign workers hired to plug gaps in Britain's crisis-hit social care system are still working in the industry. It is not even known if they remain in the UK, as there is no official data linking visa status with ongoing residence in Britain. So this is the thing. What really screams this to me is that the government have obviously tried to obfuscate, in many instances not tracking data or anything like that. Now that's really coming back to bite them in the arse, because people have these questions, people want these questions answered. Trust in the government is an all-time low, and now they're just having to come out and admit we have no idea how deep our incompetence and how deep our malice in many instances runs with the immigration that has just been used. And I say this not with any hatred towards any person necessarily that's come over. I say it in this way, that immigration, the way that the immigration policies have worked out, not necessarily in theory, but in practice, because obviously in practice it's worked out very differently to how it was supposed to work in theory, which people voted for, right? People voted for example, in the Conservative government, at least scaling immigration back, which many people obviously weren't happy with, but at least scaling immigration back to the tens of thousands every year. Instead of getting that, they got hundreds of thousands of millions coming in every year for their trouble. So that's what I mean. What was promised didn't work out in practice. And I kind of lost my train of thought as to where I was going to go with that. To where I was going to go with that. Oh, yeah, that immigration by lying politicians has been used as a weapon against the British people. And it's been used as a weapon of subjugation and ruining their ability to resolve the problems democratically. That is why, for example, that Plaid Cymru float the idea about that they want to bring 1.5 million refugees from Gaza. It's not from the bottom of their hearts, although I imagine that a lot of them are indeed more on the side of Gazans than they are on the side of Israel, for example, and are more angry at the state of Israel than they are really caring about the dead children and stuff like that. But they see it as a voting bloc that they want to import. They see it as a voting bloc that they want to import. Because make no mistake, if that was to happen, Wales is a country of about 3 million, 3.2 million, thereabouts. That would be enough to shift pretty much every, voter constituency in this country. Make no mistake about it. And they're not doing, as I said, it from the kindness of their own hearts. They're doing it because they see it as a weapon to remove the native Welsh person's, in this instance, because Blair would be a Welsh government figure, right? The native Welsh person's ability to resolve their problems democratically. And that's what they want. That's what they want. Okay, they're globalists in nationalists' clothing. Care staff were added to the UK's skilled worker scheme in February 2022, allowing them to come to Britain on a health and care visa if they could secure a job with an employer approved by the Home Office, which obviously is just basically a foreign office, amid fears the industry would otherwise collapse. Since then, the UK has granted 154,402 visas to migrants providing, quote, caring personal services in Britain, allowing them to stay here for up to 5 years at a time. And I'm very, very skeptical of this as well. Due to how many videos you see circulating on X, and I know X is a very big hotbed of anger, but it is the one place where you're going to see things that you won't otherwise see on mainstream media outlets because they don't want you seeing them. And there is an alarming trend that I'm seeing with these migrant care workers coming over and in many instances being very, very abusive to the people that they're supposed to be taking care of. That's not a problem that's unique to them whatsoever, obviously, but there is an alarming trend. There is an alarming trend I see emerging with how many clips you see on social media. And as well, obviously, there is the thing to note as well that sometimes the same clip gets reshared several times and it makes you think that there's a lot of more of these instances going on than there otherwise would be. But this is where government transparency really does matter. When the government then comes out and says, we have no idea where these people even are, it doesn't fill people full of confidence. Doesn't fill people full of confidence. That's where this is another aspect where large levels of immigration have ruined the trust in society, because it's basically brought a bunch of strangers in that we don't know who the hell they are, put them into position of care over your relatives, and then you're supposed to just trust these people. You're supposed to just trust these people. I'm sorry, no. I'm sorry, no. There will be more trust with people whom you know and that are similar to you in your society. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. Poles, for example, they keep their state very, very ethnically homogenous, and they control the border very strongly for this exact reason. For this exact reason. Because yes, you're going to have bad people within your communities. Yes, absolutely. But ferrying in a bunch of strangers that have no reason to care about you or anything like that, and have no reason to do it, and they're just doing it for money and benefits, that's going to make things a hell of a lot worse. And that's what we're seeing all across Europe. And that's a sad reality. That's a very, very sad reality, unfortunately. Since then, as I said, the UK has granted over 154,402 visas approving migrants, providing care and personal services. And all of these are taking the jobs as well of native British people, native Welsh people, English people, Scottish people that are otherwise doing the training to fill these roles. That they wonder why they can't get a job then when they go out of college or they go out of university. They wonder why they can't find it half the time. Right? Because they've already been filled up. They've already been replaced. And it's designed, in many ways, just to ruin the structure of the British family. The structure of the British family, because it stops people from getting good employment. It stops men from getting good employment, for example, because they get fired for the political views or whatever. And then that damages their ability to have a family. That damages their ability to have a family. So they're supposed to be the head of the family, spiritual head of the family, absolutely. I know many people are going to get triggered just by saying that. Supposed to be the head of the family in that way. They can't have that without stable employment and stuff like that, and actually giving the woman in this scenario a reason to respect them, right? I'm saying that as somebody that has yet to really rebound myself. That's why I basically throw myself headlong into this, because it's really the only thing that I can do, having been fired for political views myself. And it does put a strain on things. It does damage your reputation. All of these things. You do come across as lazy and incompetent and all of these things. And it's all by design. It's all by design. All fruits of feminism and a feminized government as well, which massively benefits from the feminist ideology. Satan is the greatest feminist of all, after all. But again, it's all designed to destroy the family. And people have sadly taken that attitude up in droves. You say about traditional family structures and stuff like that, now people recoil as if you've said a prayer to a demon in many instances. And we'll talk about some demonic things later as well. But as I mentioned, this is all by design, and this could be solved tomorrow with a competent government, or rather with a government that's not completely evil and turned against its people. The annual total peaked at 107,772 in 2023 before falling to 9,539 in 2024 when the Tories barred people on KA visas from bringing family members with them to the UK. Surprised they'd have thought they would have benefited from that, but I don't know. That's what I mean. The Tories in this instance will show that, will make a fleeting, pointless thing in many instances with how many people they allowed to come across the border. But then they can say, oh, well, at least we stopped KA people from bringing their dependents, right? At least we stopped KA people from bringing their dependents. Meanwhile, they oversaw the largest immigration wave in history, even going back to Tony Blair's remarks, right? Which I'll go back and show you something which he said recently that really signaled the start of all our problems. In fact, I will go see if I can find it now, because it's on this point. When I say that this was all by design, ladies and gentlemen, everything is by design. There's something here which somebody posted 2 days ago, from Tony Blair's Forces of Conservatism speech to the 1999 Labour conference. This would have been, I believe, just before, let me see, when he was elected in 1997. So again, this was around the time that I was born. I was born in 99, right? So this was around the time that I was born. Tony Blair had been Prime Minister for 1 to 2 years at this point. Okay, he was elected in 1997. And when we say that these people, like Tony Blair, have a lot to answer for, it's for things like this. This is part of his speech that he gave in 1999 that perfectly encapsulates the philosophy behind everything that's done now. Why we had to have our noses rubbed in diversity, why we had to have all of this stuff inflicted upon us, why the family had to be destroyed, all of this stuff, because he had to destroy what is quote unquote, what is called quote unquote the forces of conservatism. I mean, the forces that meant the British society in the way that it was. At this point, it was still relatively prosperous. Okay, people in my communities like mine, they'd already been destroyed by Maggie Thatcher and all the and the privatization of the industry that she sent off elsewhere, right? So my communities had already been destroyed, but the rest of it had already been destroyed by this philosophy which come out of his progressive government. And it says here, to be the progressive force that defeats the forces of conservatism. Forces of conservatism, again, implying that our way of life had something about it that was worth conserving. Think about it. What does conservative mean? It just simply means you want to conserve something. Many people who were conservative in value don't want to conserve the society we have now because it's not British society. You should think about that. Conservative is a very bad word around these places, right? Conservative in value just means that you don't think something should be changed. You think something should be conserved. And we definitely had a society which should have been conserved. Strong family structure. Hell, we started the Industrial Revolution. All of that stuff was worth conserving and developing upon. But it was people like Tony Blair that wanted to destroy it all by design. For the 21st century will not be about a battle between capitalism and socialism, but between the forces of progress and the forces of conservatism. Simply replace forces of progress, quote unquote, with evil and the forces of good, and you understand the wider battle that's going on. You understand the battle that goes on far above Tony Blair, goes on above all of us, the wider spiritual battle that's going on at the moment all across the world. They are, as in the forces of conservatism, he calls them, are what hold our nation back. Not just in the Conservative Party, but within us, within our nation. Speaking within the inherent drives within us to want to have a family, to want to prosper, the family being the bedrock of society, to want to be God-fearing, God-worshipping people, because that gives us purpose and nothing makes sense without it, right? The forces that they do not understand that creating a new Britain of true equality is no more a betrayal of Britain's history than New Labour is of Labour's values. The old prejudices where foreign means bad, where multiculturalism is not something to celebrate, but a left-wing conspiracy to destroy their way of life. He outlined it. He spoke very candidly about it, that he wanted to destroy the forces that were holding the nation together at its very core, which are the values within us. He wanted to usurp the values within us and turn them from good to evil. They were already on the cascading in many ways. They were already cascading down that part anyway at this point, right? That, you know, the massive rises in, you know, feminism movement and the sexual revolution and all the rest of it. These forces were already long in the you know, in the process, so to speak, before Tony Blair came along. But he came along to give this, said, no, we need to completely rewire people. Then you understand why the propaganda campaign, everything just fell off. Looking back on my childhood now, everything through school, everything that we were being told, everything just fell off. And I can see now that I think back to it from time to time, you know, the indoctrination we were put in through school, which is very left-wing, very socialist, red-coded, right? Red-washed, for lack of a better term. And now it just all makes sense. It all makes sense why things felt completely off. Basically, the entire public schooling that we had was one big giant struggle session in many instances. Not being told about the evil forces of socialism, not being told about Mao's China, not being told about the Russian Revolution beyond 1917 in the Soviet Union. Everything throughout the Cold War that I think back to now in history and stuff like that, designed to make the US look bad and the Soviet Union look at least not as bad, right? Nowhere was we ever taught about the atrocities that were being committed in the Soviet Union, at least as far as I can remember. I remember the teacher, because obviously I'm not necessarily blaming the teachers or anything like that. They got jobs to do. They just got to do it. They might not even know any better. They might be doing it out of ignorance themselves. Whether they were or not, I don't know. They might have had the sensibilities themselves, in which case that makes it slightly different. But point being, many of them don't have the place to turn to either. If they lose a job, they lose everything, right? So, you know, I remember coming away with it that, you know, the US was the bad guy. The US was the bad guy. I'm not saying the US was perfect in that. I'm not saying the US was perfect by any means. But there was a reason why people were going one way over the Berlin Wall and not the other. There was a reason why so many people were trying to flee to the west and not the east. Unless obviously you're Keir Starmer and you appear in the Soviet Union spy records. All right? But this speaks to a much bigger problem, is that we now need to undo the programming that's been done within us. You might not even have realized it until you've heard these words coming from a man, which if you look at him, if you just look at him, let me just have a look at this. If you just, and again, you might accuse me of cherry picking photos or whatever, but when you look at this, when you think back to the people that elected Blair in 1997. Again, this obviously he looked a lot different back then. But evil has its effects on you. Evil has its effects on you. Sadly, our previous generation weren't able to pick up on that. Maybe they were too eager to go along with it. Maybe they were too eager to reap the fruits, right? To reap the fruits of virtue signaling, of feeling good rather than doing good, and protecting your own country and your own people and your own sovereignty. We were so keen to give it away because this is and has been now a perfectly orchestrated campaign, and people are realizing it. One thing I want to touch on before I move on to the next part, which is more about how Labour... Hang on a minute, guys. There we go. More about how Labour is destroying our countries, is that I mentioned before in the last episode, or was the episode before, I can't remember, that there was that group that was marching in, and this is part of another worrying trend in many ways. There was a group that was marching in Melbourne in the streets, the Nationalist Socialist Network, I believe they were called, and I thought that they were more of a PSYOP campaign, right? It does appear that I may have been wrong on that. It does appear that I may have been wrong on that, because I've seen more people on X, for example, commentators on the right, even potentially more to the right than I am, right? Very much so, more, you know, extreme, quote unquote extreme, because what is extreme nowadays, opinions than me, right? Saying that it's mad how a group like the Nationalist Socialist Network are now able to pull together like a crowd of about 1,000 people. And that, you know, with the lurch to the left that we've been forced into against our consent, and we've said that we don't want to go there every single time, and our politicians have done it anyway, by removing the incentive, as well as in many people's eyes, the ability to resolve this democratically and politically, they've now created, especially among young people, the most right-wing generation in history. All right, whether they meant to create it or not, but they've now created, especially among young people, many young people, some of the most fanaticized right-wing generation in history. And history is a precedent for how things go when these things happen. I'm not saying they're going to pan out the exact same way as they always have done throughout history, right? But the biggest thing is this didn't happen by accident. This didn't happen by accident. This happened, as Keir Starmer said, by design. And many people going for these groups now feeling that they have to do so out of necessity. This is also not good because you have both sides now rising. They're going to come to a head one way or another. And I said, if you think you've seen rivers of blood already, I don't think we've seen anything yet, unless this does get resolved. And it's only going to get resolved one way, by the people getting what they want.